talk about a story that honestly sounds like it's pulled straight from science fiction. But it's not. It's a completely real, documented medical case. And it's one of those stories that's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about the human brain, about consciousness, and really what it even means to be a person.
So let me just ask you this. Imagine you go to the doctor, you get a brain scan, and they come back and tell you that 90% of what's inside your skull isn't brain, it's just empty space filled with fluid. I mean, what kind of life could you even live?
And look, that's not just some weird thought experiment. This actually happened. We're about to get into the incredible, true story of a man who walked, talked, held a job, all while his skull was almost entirely full of liquid. So let's start at the beginning.
You know, this whole thing didn't start with some huge dramatic accident. It all started with something so normal. A 44-year-old man in France, a civil servant, went to the hospital simply because his leg felt a bit weak. What the doctors found would end up being one of the most mind-boggling cases in the history of neuroscience. So they did the standard thing. They ran a brain scan. And when the image popped up on the screen, well, they just couldn't believe it. It didn't look like a human brain at all. Where there should have been dense gray matter, there were just these huge, dark voids. These were massive, fluid-filled chambers that had basically taken over his entire skull.
Let's just sit with that number for a second. More than 90%. The fluid in his head had built up so much over the years that it had literally squeezed his actual brain tissue into this incredibly thin layer just pressed up against the inside of his skull. Now, based on everything we know about how the brain works, a person like this, they shouldn't even be conscious, let alone complaining about a weak leg.
And this is where the story gets truly wild. This is the central mind-bending paradox of the whole thing. The man standing in front of the doctors just did not match the catastrophic image on that screen. He wasn't in a coma, he wasn't severely disabled, he was just a regular guy.
I mean, just look at this contrast. On one hand, you have the scan, which shows a brain that, for all intents and purposes, is barely there. It's almost completely destroyed. But then you have the man's actual life. He worked a job, he was married, he had a family, he was living a totally normal life. How could these two things possibly be true at the same time?
Now, you might be wondering, was this guy some kind of hidden genius? Well, no, actually. To be clear, his IQ was tested and it was below average. But that's what makes this whole thing even more baffling. He wasn't a genius, but his mind worked well enough for him to have a job, a family, and just be a part of society like anyone else.
So yeah, the question that just exploded in the medical world was, how? How on earth is any of this possible? This case didn't just bend the rules, it felt like it completely shattered our basic understanding of how the brain is supposed to function.
Think about that gap for a second. What doctors expected to see from a scan like that was someone in a vegetative state, at best. What they found was a guy living his life. This huge chasm between what should have been and what was, well, it was a massive mystery.
For the longest time, we kind of thought of the brain like a computer motherboard. You know, this part does language, that part does movement. If you break a piece, that function is gone, period. But this guy's brain was almost entirely missing, and yet the functions were still there. This one case just threw a giant wrench into that old, rigid way of thinking.
So what's the secret? How did his brain do it? Well, the answer isn't magic. It's a remarkable and very real power that the brain has. It's a concept known as neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity is, simply put, the brain's secret weapon. It's this incredible ability to change, to adapt, to literally rewire itself when things go wrong. It's not just about learning a new hobby, it's about physical, functional survival against absolutely insane odds.
So how did it work for this man? Well, the secret ingredient was time. A lot of time. This wasn't a sudden traumatic injury. He had a condition called hydrocephalus, where fluid builds up slowly over decades, starting from when he was an infant. Because it happened so gradually, this slow, gentle pressure gave his brain an amazing chance to adapt. Over years and years, it figured out how to reassign all the important jobs, like talking, moving, thinking, to the tiny bit of healthy tissue that was left.
And here's a perfect way to think about it. Imagine a city being slowly, gradually flooded over decades. Instead of just collapsing, the people would find ways to adapt. They'd reroute traffic, they'd move important buildings to the high ground, they'd find new ways to live in the small space they have left. That is exactly what this man's brain did. It saved itself by reorganizing.
So,
Okay, this is a fascinating one-in-a-million story. But what does it really teach all of us? Well, it basically forces us to completely redefine what we think the limits of human resilience are.
So, what are the big takeaways? First, our brains are way more adaptable than we ever give them credit for. Second, it makes you wonder if the sheer amount of brain you have is really the most important thing. Maybe it's not the whole story. It's also just a humbling reminder that biology can be really weird, and it doesn't always follow our neat and tidy rules. And finally, it opens up this huge question for science. Why did his brain adapt so incredibly well when so many others don't? We still don't have the answer to that.
And really, it all boils down to this one powerful and kind of humbling idea from the researchers who studied him. After all of our amazing scientific breakthroughs, a single person can walk into a hospital and show us that we are still just scratching the surface of understanding the biggest mysteries of all, like consciousness itself.
So the next time you think about the limits of what's possible, I want you to remember this story. Remember the man who lived a normal life, with a job and a family, all with a brain that, by all logic, should not have worked at all. It's just a profound testament to the incredible, enduring mystery of the human mind.